Byron Hale was a man in his early 30s, a novelist whose imagination stretched further than the limits of reality. His bestsellers often tested the boundaries of human psychology, stories of love, obsession, and betrayal that teetered on the edge of morality. Byron's reputation was built not only on his brilliant prose, but also on how deeply intimate and painfully raw his depictions were. As he often joked in interviews, it's not enough to write about passion, you have to feel it rip you to pieces. But for Byron, his latest manuscript, a story about a vigilante detective tangled in unorthodox love, lacked the visceral pull that had always defined his work. Something was missing, something real. That was when Byron met Ash. Ash Lancaster was a private detective in his late 20s, with sharp green eyes and an air of rugged confidence that bordered on arrogance. Byron had hired him under the pretense of conducting background research for his novel. Ash Lancaster was a private detective in his late 20s, with sharp green eyes and an air of rugged confidence that bordered on arrogance. Slightly disheveled, yet intentionally so, Ash was the type of man who looked out of place in Byron's well-manicured mansion, but somehow commanded attention regardless. Their first meeting took place in Byron's study, a large room lined with bookshelves that groaned under the weight of literary greats. Byron, perched in his leather chair, studied Ash with the intensity of a predator. Ash, unfazed, leaned back in the visitor's seat and crossed his arms. "So," Ash said, his voice low and clipped, "you've spent 3 weeks emailing me about your novel. Care to start with something useful, like why you need a private detective to help with fiction?" Byron's lips curved into a faint smile. "Because fiction isn't enough. The truth has an edge to it, Mr. Lancaster. If I'm going to write about someone like you, I need to understand how you think, how you live." For weeks, Ash became Byron's unofficial muse. Interviews turned into shadowing. Shadowing turned into lingering. Byron followed Ash through the winding streets of the city, observing how he worked a case, noting every movement and mannerism. Byron quickly found himself gravitating to something far beyond professional curiosity. Ash was magnetic, an enigma wrapped in confidence and danger. He found his thoughts drifting to the detective even when he wasn't present. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Writers were meant to observe, not feel. But Byron couldn't stop himself. Ash had infiltrated his mind, and no chapter of his novel could capture how utterly consumed he was by that man. For Byron, his obsession took a darker turn. He started following Ash, not as Byron the novelist, but as Byron the man who hungered for all the things he had no right to desire. Interviews turned into shadowing. Shadowing turned into lingering. Byron followed Ash through the winding streets of the city, observing how he worked a case, noting every movement and mannerism. Ash humored him, at least in the beginning, but there were moments when his sharp gaze held a flicker of something darker. Amusement, or perhaps something more predatory. Byron quickly found himself gravitating to something far beyond professional curiosity. Ash was magnetic, an enigma wrapped in confidence and danger. He found his thoughts drifting to the detective even when he wasn't present. He replayed their conversations, memorized the cadence of Ash's voice. He even began imagining ways in which Ash's hands, so assured and knowing in their gestures, might feel against his skin. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Writers were meant to observe, not feel. But Byron couldn't stop himself. Ash had infiltrated his mind, and no chapter of his novel could capture how utterly consumed he was by that man. Soon, Byron's obsession took a darker turn. He started following Ash, not as Byron the novelist, but as Byron the man who hungered for all the things he had no right to desire. He camped outside Ash's modest apartment late into the night, studying the silhouette of the detective as he moved across his living room. He learned where Ash got his coffee, the route he took on his morning jogs, and even the small corner bar where Ash shared drinks with acquaintances. And then Ash noticed. It was a subtle shift, but Byron could feel it. Ash would glance over his shoulder more often. He'd catch Byron lurking just a second too long. The detective's knowing smirk made Byron's heart pound in something halfway between fear and exhilaration. Ash knew, and he wasn't angry. That only made Byron's obsession more uncontrollable. The final straw came one evening when Ash cornered Byron in an alley near the detective's office. Byron hadn't even realized he'd been wandering that far into Ash's territory once again. The alley was dimly lit, the faint smell of rain in the air. If you're going to stalk someone, at least put in the effort to be discreet. Byron's excuses faltered on his lips, his breath hitching instead. Ash's presence was overpowering in the confined space, and Byron could feel his pulse hammering against his ribs.
I had to.
You couldn't stop what?
Watching me, following me, thinking about me. Yes, I can't stop thinking about you. You're in my head, Ash, everywhere in my mind. I want to know you, control you, have you. Do you understand what that's like?
For a split second, Ash's expression flickered, and Byron thought he might have overstepped, that the detective would walk away, or worse. But instead, Ash smiled, a slow and dangerous curve of his lips. I understand more than you think, but you don't know what you're asking for. Byron didn't sleep that night. Instead, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he concocted a plan, a desperate, reckless plan. If Ash wouldn't willingly give himself over, Byron would claim him by force. The novelist's obsession had spiraled completely out of control. Over the following days, Byron meticulously prepared. When he finally executed his plan, it unfolded flawlessly. Ash finished his work late one evening, walking to his car in a near-empty parking lot. Byron waited, adrenaline coursing through him as he ambushed the detective. A touch of chloroform was all it took. When Ash woke, groggy and restrained, he found himself in an unfamiliar room filled with Byron's signature style. Leather armchairs, velvet curtains, and towering bookshelves. He was tied securely, but not harshly, to a chair in what appeared to be Byron's study. Byron paced in front of him, his expression frantic but alight with raw emotion.
I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to bring you here. Don't you see? It's the only way we can be together.
Ash blinked, the haze lifting from his eyes. Byron, his mind a storm of obsession and desire, faced Ash, who was groggy yet strangely calm. Byron's voice, trembling with raw emotion, filled the room. In the dimly lit study, Byron confessed his desperate need to have Ash by his side. Ash listened, his sharp green eyes following Byron's every move, the restraints a mere formality. And then Ash spoke, his voice calm and unwavering, cutting through Byron's frantic energy. Byron, he said simply, his voice calm despite the situation. You're even more demented than I thought. Byron moved closer, his determination undeterred by Ash's words. Say what you want, Byron replied, his voice steady, but you're mine now. That was when Ash did something utterly unexpected. In that moment, Byron realized he was not the captor, but the captivated. He smirked, not with the defiance of a captive, but with the confidence of a predator springing its trap. That's the first honest thing you've said, Ash said, his voice a low growl. But you've got it backwards. Byron's chest tightened. What are you talking about? I've been waiting for you to break, Byron, pushing you, watching you. You think I didn't notice your little shadow games? Byron's heart stopped. You noticed? Of course I noticed. Ash's voice softened as he stood, the ropes slipping off like they were merely props, because I wanted you to notice me too. Before Byron could process what was happening, Ash was in front of him, gripping his wrist with surprising tenderness. His green eyes burned with an intensity that mirrored Byron's own obsession. All this time, I've been waiting for you to make the first move, Ash said. And now that you have, I think I should return the favor. Byron barely had time to respond before Ash's lips claimed his. The kiss was not gentle. It was every bit as aggressive and unrelenting as their fixation with one another. Byron felt his knees weaken, his carefully constructed world collapsing into the embrace of the man who had haunted him for months. As the days bled into nights, the mansion became their sanctuary, a place where desire and madness intertwined. They reveled in the chaos they had created, their mutual obsession binding them together in a way neither had thought possible. For all their games and manipulations, their love had been forged in the fire of obsession, burning fiercely and unapologetically. Together they were both captor and captive, and for Byron and Ash, that was exactly as it should be.